Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome to the Pebble in Your Shoe podcast. Today I have Substack writer Linda Hoenigsberg here today to talk about her Substack and the interesting things that she's doing in her third chapter. So, welcome, Linda.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you for coming. So I met Linda like I'm meeting so many people lately through the internet, and I came across her Substack, and Linda has led a fascinating life, and she just recently started her Substack last year, correct?
Uh, yes, late last year.
Late last year. And boy, what a story. What a story Linda has to tell. So, Linda, what made you decide to become a Substack writer?
I have always loved writing, been passionate about writing, and I had a few articles published and a few little stories in anthologies like Chicken Soup for the Soul, but I never went as far as I had wished. And I had subscribed to a few Substacks and thought, wow, this is a pretty cool platform. And then suddenly the bug just hit me again. And I feel like I still have a lot to say to that may help other people. So my story has changed. It's like what I thought about my life 10 years ago has just been turned on its head in the last decade. And um, I had never written about it. And so I really wanted to get on Substack and start a place where people would feel comfortable talking about their beliefs, how they may have changed over time, the whole subject of mental health. And there's a word that people are using called deconstruction that has to do with people who have been really wounded by evangelical Christianity, especially with the political landscape. And I was in that category too, and wanted to write about my experience of losing faith in evangelical Christianity without losing my faith in God. And so that's where it started.
So that was so interesting because your parents did not raise you in a religious household, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
But from the time I was very young, I thought about God and about Jesus Christ. And I don't really know where I even heard the concept, other than I think that we went to like vacation Bible school a couple times, during my childhood. But I really wanted to be a part of that. And I write in my Substack about being about 10 years old and just getting up one morning and putting on my Easter dress and taking myself off to church, and that experience and how my mother reacted to it. So I started.
How did your mother react to it?
Well, it's a funny story because as I was walking home from that service, I just remembered the pastor talking about how we needed to be like Jesus. And I didn't know anything about that. And in my mind, in my 10-year-old mind, I thought, well, at least I should be talking like Jesus. And I imagined him talking in a very um, distinct English accent. And
That's so
so
cute.
I walked into the house and I said, "Hello, mother. Church was, wonderful. You really ought to come someday." And she just looked at me like over the Sunday paper, like, okay.
That's so
And
cute.
like it just didn't last long. I went out and started playing with my sister and forgot all about trying to talk like Jesus talked. But that's what I thought of it at the time.
So then there was a big gap between that first contact with the church and then, well, how old were you when the next time you went?
The next time I was 15 and I had met a man who was cruising around the school after school let out, 21 years old, and we started dating. And his family went to this house church, and I didn't know anything about it, but it was definitely a cult like atmosphere. And I started going back with him to that place for a little while.
Where was this happening? What state were you in?
in Los Angeles, California.
Oh, in California. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was did you become very interested in being a part of this group?
Yes. Although, one of the things that my Substack is called Another Think Coming, after that phrase, if you thought that, you have another think coming. And there was s- already at 15 years old, this cognitive dissonance I experienced going to that church and some of the stuff that was said and some of the stuff that was happening. But I had no, I guess, self esteem or strength to uh, trust my own gut at that point in life. And so I just went along with it. And there were some very strange things that were happening there. But at the same time, there was a couple of experiences I had that to this day, I still think were grace
Mhm.
from God. And so that was confusing then. Like, if this is so weird, why would he be involved? That was
Did
that.
you did you share any of this with your parents?
No, my parents at that point had kind of had it with me. By that point, I had been in juvenile hall already and gotten kicked out of high school soon after I met this guy. And I think they were so disengaged in being parents by that point. And so we didn't really talk other than to argue about what I wanted to do that they
Okay,
weren't agree with.
so you were sort of a teenager on their own, right? I mean, you sort of had to process things in the limited way that a teenager can without any kind of parental guidance.
Exactly.
So you were a young mother, correct?
Yes, we ended up getting married. I was not pregnant, but my parents signed the agreement to allow me to get married. I was no longer in high school.
You were
And
16 at the time, or
16.
yes.
And about 6 months later, I got pregnant with our firstborn son. And by that time, my husband had left me a bunch of times while I was pregnant and then permanently after I had our son. And I ended up like renting an apartment of my own, getting a job, and trying to raise our little child by myself, 17.
17. So, what happened? How did you manage to raise him as a single mother, and how did that go?
Well, it didn't go great at first. What ended up happening was I started to experience mental illness in the form of anxiety and depression. And I made a suicide attempt. And my parents talked me into placing myself in the state mental hospital for a time while they took care of my son. And that was another very weird experience. I think I write about it on my Substack. And, when I got out, I lived with my parents for a while, but some more terrible things happened. And, eventually, life got really, really hard, and, uh, I ended up that's when I started going to church, and by that time, my son was 6, and we were still managing the best I knew how. I mean, he, was loved, and he knew that, and, not neglected or anything, but I'm kinda thankful that he doesn't have a great recollection of that time in his life.
Do you feel that you received the care that you needed from the mental hospital?
No, in the mental hospital, and this is a famous mental hospital in Los Angeles, the psychologist put me on Thorazine, which made it to where I couldn't think or walk or talk, and then screamed at me in group therapy that if I thought I could make it outside of that hospital, I was delusional. And I ended up signing myself out against medical advice because by that time I was 18 years old and I could.
And so then you left, and where did you and your son then end up?
We ended up living with my parents again. And you, you and I were talking earlier about one of the stories that I share on Substack about and I don't want to jump ahead, but it was 2 weeks after leaving that hospital that I experienced gang rape, and that was when I was living with my parents.
Right. So you had gone out with a guy and you had no idea at the time what you were going to. Well, he drugged you, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, you were drugged. And that's when that happened. Already, as such a young person, you experienced so
Well,
much.
this was the weird part about that. Um, my mother, as I was dating my first husband, when she would get really mad at me for anything, she would call me a whore or something like that. And I was a virgin
Mhm.
and never had been with anyone until my husband. And my husband, when he would get mad at me, would say those same things. So when that rape happened, I thought, yep, like they're right.
It confirmed it.
It confirmed it. So that's the next couple years were
And you never told your parents what happened, even though you were
no,
living with
because
them.
well, I was afraid that they would force me to call the police. And for some reason, I just knew in my gut that if the police questioned me, they would blame me. That they would ask me questions like, "Why did you go on a date with a person you didn't know very well? Why did you go to his house? What were you wearing? Why did you take drugs?" Why, I just felt like
Always the woman's fault, right?
exactly. And I knew that somehow at 18 years old, and so I never told, the authorities or my parents or anybody.
So I imagine there's a big gap between you and your son and being in the mental hospital, the gang rape, and then you becoming a therapist. But in between, you also had your experience with, I guess, the evangelical church or churches that you were sort of, they were also forming you before you became a therapist. I sort of want to like build up to how eventually all these things added up to you going into that field.
Yes. So, after the rape happened, I basically just became this like hippie on the streets, uh, thinking I was getting back at men type of a person. It was all related to the rape, although it would be years before I figured that out. And then, I met a new boyfriend. I write about that. He was extremely abusive. And when I got away from him, which was running away in like grabbing my kids and running away and never seeing him again type of a thing, then I fell apart mentally. I became very seriously mentally ill. And then a year and a half after that, when I was still very seriously mentally ill, my brother killed himself. And that is what caused me to turn back to the church, that event.
So
And I would,
when you became mentally ill, there was no treatment. You just were suffering.
yeah, I mean, I was going to a psychiatrist for a year and a half and
Yeah.
then other therapists, but uh the what they were doing was having me go over and over and over my trauma experiences, not explaining to me, anything about panic disorder or major depression or anything. I just thought all these things came from outer space or something. There was no treatment. It was just all talking about my horrible experiences.
Mhm.
And so I got worse and worse. The psychiatrist tried to molest me. Then I was going to some Christian therapists who were just in their master's program. And my brother died. I started going to church. And what I was taught was you don't go to a counselor who isn't, you don't go to counseling, you don't take any kind of psychotropic medication. You just wait for God to heal you. And that's what I thought. Like, I just really thought that that would happen.
Well, the death of your brother from an overdose. Um, I assume then, and I don't remember reading, but was this like for an extended period where he was abusing substances, or was it a one-time thing, or?
Well, it was actually his antidepressants. So what had happened was he and I were 1 year apart, and we were very best friends who watched out for each other even during our teen years. Like, you didn't get dinner at our house, so you had to like take money out of mom's wallet and walk down to the shopping center. And he and I always would check in with each other. Did you have anything to eat? Let's go. That type of thing. So we were very close. And he went to Vietnam at barely 18 years old, came back very disturbed, and I was trying to help him. And I took him to the LA County mental health department, and they gave him a prescription for a antidepressant. And they knew that he had tried suicide before, and it's against the law in California to give somebody a prescription like that. And that's what he overdosed on. He took the bottle of antidepressants a few weeks later,
Okay.
and they were sued. By that time, he was legally married and had a 2-year-old, and
Oh,
uh, they were sued, and his widow won that lawsuit.
okay, okay. So he wasn't addicted to them. He took them
Right.
because of his mental health.
Yeah.
He was depressed, and he did want to. No, I mean, did he leave a note, or I mean, it was a deliberate act, correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay, okay, okay. So again, another trauma that you experience, and then that's when your involvement in the church starts to heighten,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. That's when I found a little church in Los Angeles, and they were, to be fair, wonderful people to me. Um, they all were doing what they thought was right. They took me under their wings and supported me and helped me. They were just very misinformed about a lot of things. And so I look back at that time. There was a couple years there before I moved away where I was going there. Um, I have wonderful memories, believe it or not, of that place. But looking back, I can see where a lot of my misconceptions about what it means to have faith in God started were there.
Then how many years were you in the church, active in the church?
That one was 2 years, and then I moved, but I continued to find churches wherever I would move to.
So it was more of an evangelical type of church. I mean,
Yeah,
denomination.
charismatic type evangelical church.
Okay.
So they believed in, uh, speaking in tongues and there's kind of a lot of buzzwords that have to do with that, but uh, and the beliefs, some of those beliefs have changed in the evangelical church over the decades since then. But at the time I was going there, they believed that whatever you said in faith, it was called kind of name it, claim it. You could even say, in 5 years, I'm going to own a pink Cadillac in the name of Jesus. And that would just set that in motion for you.
Oh, that reminds me sort of the current mindset of like manifesting. I'm going to
Yes,
manifest something.
yes,
So
very much.
that has its roots in that kind of thinking, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So you actually were healed of an ailment, correct?
Yeah, like
Got prayed
before
over?
that, yeah, before when I was going to that cult one in the house, I had are you talking about the papilloma on my
Yes.
foot? Yeah.
Yes.
I had a papilloma underneath my foot, which was discovered by the PE nurse or whatever at
Is
the
that the
school.
same as a wart, or is this like something?
Yes, it's like a wart, but it grows from the outside in towards the bone
Oh, really? Okay.
instead of the other way. So, my mother took me to a podiatrist who told me at the time that it needed surgery and that it could grow back. And if it does, he would have to do the surgery again because there's no other way. It doesn't just disappear.
Mhm.
And so I had the surgery, but it grew back. So I had that little house church people pray for my foot. And then I went back to the podiatrist to have the second surgery. And he picks up my foot and looks at it, gets a confused look on his face, picks up my other foot, kind of goes back and forth, and he goes, "It's gone." And I said, "Oh, well, that's because I had my church people pray for me." And I remember him saying, "Oh, that gives me chills." Now, I held on to that as a healing, which was one of the confusing things about realizing that that church was so off on so many levels, until pretty recently when I was writing about it and I decided to find out, is it true that those never go away? And I found some things that did suggest they could, but that it would take up to a couple years. And so now I can't really explain what happened there.
Mhm.
And I just have to realize, yeah, there's mystery in a lot of things that happen. You're not going to find out.
So we were saying earlier that you kind of were a bad picker as far
Yes.
as men. So, and now you've been happily married for a long time, but can you kind of talk to that, how your earlier relationships um, were not great and how you realized and how you came to break free from them?
Yes. One thing I know now that I didn't realize was that I was going to be attracted to addictive people, people with addictions. And I didn't realize that that had to do with being raised in an alcoholic family. And so I would meet men who I felt very comfortable with extremely quickly. And that's one of the red flags. Like you meet somebody and 2 hours later, you feel like you just always have known them. And what I know now is that it was the familiarity of something that I couldn't name, and that was this addictive personality.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even guys who weren't actively using or drinking at the time we met still had some of those earmarks and had other things that were just really not good for a relationship. And it took me up until I was in my 40s to figure that out.
Now, was it a conscious thing or you just got tired of, you started to see the patterns yourself that you were engaging, or was it your transition towards being a therapist that you started looking at things differently?
Oh, that's right. Okay, you wanted to know how so when I held on all those years to wanting to become a therapist someday because of my experiences with being in therapy in my 20s.
Okay, so
Like,
when did the spark say, hey, maybe I can do this? When did that happen? Do you remember?
probably when I was about 35 or so. I mean, I thought about it from the time I was in my late early 30s, I would say. But
And
I was
I mean,
sorry.
you got kicked out of high school.
Yeah,
So
so how am I
you
gonna
were,
do that?
did you have college at any point between then and 35 when you thought you might want to do this?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of exactly when I started taking college courses. Um, I think I was in my early 30s.
Okay, so
I
then
know
it
I
was
was.
sort of
I know
coming
I
to,
was.
yeah, coming
But
together.
I thought I was taking college courses with business in mind.
Mhm.
So when I was in my 20s and I thought I want to be a therapist, I never thought I could ever go to college. Because for one thing, I still had panic disorder and depression. And I was very limited in what I could do. At that point, I couldn't drive a car. I couldn't have a job. I was very like non-functional. That's how bad it was.
Oh,
But I
wow.
always had that dream, and what I eventually thought was that I could become a counselor at a church without a degree. And that's what I was at first trying to do. I was taking college Bible courses through correspondence. This was back in the days when you got books and paperwork in the mail and sent them back and forth. And I actually took those classes for 3 years thinking I'm going to become a church counselor.
I remember reading in one of your posts that you were counseled by volunteers who hadn't had training necessarily and maybe not while well-meaning didn't really know how to help you.
No. And that was after probably after I even started taking the college courses for business. I became interested in marketing because of a job. By that time, I was in my late 30s. So the original, like what I consider a breakdown, started when I was 23 years old. So by my uh, early 30s, I was getting better, but I wasn't completely well even yet. And I went to those church, I had gotten remarried, and I was married to a narcissistic man who was on the church staff, very charming to everyone but me. And I went to the church counselors, and he had told them that he had seen me, quote unquote, standing by our bed. And at the same time, I was in bed asleep. And he told these two church counselors that story. And they decided I had multiple personality disorder and called me in to the office and tried to convince me that that's what was wrong with me.
What? They didn't think anything was wrong with him. It was you because he saw two of you. You duplicated yourself. So it was your fault. This is like insane. Uh,
Thankfully, I was well enough. I wasn't well by any means, but I was well enough that I knew that that was not true. And I thought to myself, if this was 10 years ago, they would have just probably pushed me into either suicide or a mental hospital forever, because I can't even imagine what it would be like to think you have multiple personalities and you don't know it.
right, right, right. Well, thank God you had already matured and you were on your way thinking for yourself.
Yeah,
You were starting to recover, I guess, in some ways, mature, grace, whatever you want to call it. You were like on the way
I
up.
was. I
Yeah,
was on the way out of that whole terrible season.
that terrible season. Wow. Okay, so you didn't get your degree until you were 50, right? So what's happening now between your late 30s, you leave that guy and now you're
Then
50.
then I had about a 4-year period of having the best life ever on my own as a single woman. And I wasn't planning on ever getting married again. So this is where it comes in, what your question about how did I figure out that I had been choosing bad men? So I wasn't going to ever get married again. I assumed that most men were just terrible. And I don't remember how I found this book uh, called Women Who Love Too Much. And the author's name is just, I'm blanking on it right now, but it's called Women Who Love Too Much. I got the book and I read it, and I felt like this woman had literally followed my life story and wrote about me. That's what it felt like. And I realized, oh, all this time I didn't really know what love is. And I thought falling in love meant fear and anxiety and being afraid that you weren't loved as much as you loved and all these things. Like that's just kind of what I thought. And the light bulb went on. And I realized, oh, this man that I'm dating right now, which is my husband almost 30 years later, I don't find him someone I would want to fall in love with because he's too normal. He's nice and kind, and I don't worry about whether or not he is falling in love with me. There's just no fear involved.
It was a new experience. Yeah.
Whole new experience. And so I decided to give him a chance, and still I didn't think I would ever get married to him, but eventually I just realized, as a matter of fact, he was going to be moving out of state. And I just really had to make a decision at 40. I'm 42 at this point. Am I going to, he had been asking me to marry him. Am I going to turn him down and stay here as a single woman who barely makes ends meet and, lives alone and doesn't have any family anymore other than by that time, two of my children were adults? Or am I going to trust and commit to this man? And I kind of took a leap and trusted him, and it turned out to be the best decision, and my adult children would agree, the best decision I ever made in my life, probably. But it was still a risk when I did it.
Well, and you had already been married a few times at that point, right?
Yeah,
And
I
that's
felt
the big thing that hangs over you. Like, I already messed this up. How many times am I
how
just not
yeah.
cut out for marriage?
Yes, and how many chances is God going to give me at this,
Mhm.
right? Because that was still my thinking. Like, he's going to like hit me over the head and destroy the rest of my life if I make one of these errors.
Mhm.
And like I really did have to kind of figure that out. It took a while for me to feel okay about it, even after I did it.
So a
But
lot of that fire and brimstone thinking of God as this punishing force. You only get so
yes,
many chances. You're lucky that God doesn't cast you out. What, this kind of thinking, was that also starting to change, or was that still coming? That God is merciful. That,
I still mostly thought about God in terms of, um, you know, I look back on the way I thought about God now, and to me, it doesn't even make sense that I would think that way. But at the time, you just kind of went along with it. Yes, God is a God of wrath, and he loves you as long as you toe the line. And somehow you can love a God like that. Like, how
conditional,
it doesn't make sense.
conditional. You do this, and He'll still love you. If you don't, then He won't. So
Yeah, and then it would be your fault, like,
it's
not
like a
his fault.
child's perception of what God would be.
Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
So,
that was kind of
go
the
ahead.
teaching, of all those years.
Hmm. Okay, so you obviously decided to move out of state. Is that Montana?
Yes.
Okay, so
So, my husband, before we were married, he had been offered a good job in Missoula, Montana, and didn't think I was ever going to say yes. And so he decided to make that move, and that was when I decided, "Okay, I'm gonna, like, change my entire life and jump in with both feet." And, so I moved to Montana too.
okay, and then you pursued your degree, or are we not there
Well,
yet?
oh gosh. So, I was 42 when we got married, and 6 years later, I fell down a flight of stairs at our house and broke my neck. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, and that was a whole nother story about all kinds of stuff.
So you haven't at this point pursued your degree.
No.
Okay.
And,
You have a broken neck now.
yeah, I had a broken neck, and I was in excruciating pain and, addicted to OxyContin. The doctors put me on OxyContin and just kept saying, "You can take this forever."
And that's what they were saying, though. That's not
Yeah,
your fault. They said it's not addictive. That's what they
right,
said. Right.
yes. And
Right.
so
And you
I
are now from an addictive family. You have it in your both sides of and you're given an addictive drug. Okay.
yeah,
So
so I
that's
became
what
addicted,
right.
and, it was a nightmare. I mean, it would take so long to include everything that happened, but it was another nightmare. And I eventually cold turkeyed off of OxyContin, which took almost 2 months of wanting to die.
Mm.
And after that was over, I had a friend who is a therapist still, who came to me and told me, Linda, I don't say this to people, but if you were to ever become a therapist, I would want you in with me in my private practice. I just think that you have that gift, you have that knowledge, you would be so great. And I thought, no. I said, that would take me 10 years. And she goes, so? Like 10 years is going to go by and you're going to either have done it or you haven't done it. So she leaves and I talked to my husband. I'm like, she just said this to me. What would you think about me doing something like that? And he's just an amazing, supportive guy and told me, hey, if that's something you want to do, I will back you 100%. So I uh, started college. And in order to start, I had to go to adult education and relearn high school math first because the program wouldn't take me in unless I could pass. And I did that. And I'm not a math person. It
Oh,
like,
geometry, algebra.
yeah, like geometry. Uh, I think probably beginning algebra was in that. And I did it somehow, like it was a self-paced type program. I did it somehow. I passed it. I got into college, and then I had to take algebra in college. Like it was very difficult, but I did it. I would just had this drive about it. And then I graduated, and in
At what
between
age? At what age did you graduate?
50, it was 2006, so I was going to turn 55 that year,
Oh, okay.
that summer. And in order to become a therapist, you need a master's degree. You can't just have a bachelor's degree. So the nearest place for me to get a master's degree was an hour and 45 minutes away. And my husband and I agreed that I would move down there and live in the dorms and pursue a master's degree. And he would come down there and visit like on the weekends and stuff. And I got accepted into the program. And during that summer, before the program started, I had to have this is a very strange story. I'll make it shorter. I had a surgery that led to a finding of a brain tumor. And it's a weird story, but that's what happened. It's called an incidental finding, where they find something that they didn't expect to find when you're having surgery or some other test. And I went down, I was sent down to Missoula. That's the city an hour and 45 minutes away to see a neurosurgeon. And she told me that it was inoperable. It was right by my brain stem, and I had about a year to live. And I remember, and this was 2006, and I remember looking at her and saying, but I'm supposed to start my master's degree. And she said, oh, I would go ahead and do that. Like, and I knew what she meant, like, because if that's your desire, you're going to die. So you should do what you desire to do now. It was really weird appointment. And I just, for some reason, got it in my mind that maybe she's not right. So I started Googling. Like, I kind of had an idea that this was called a skull-based tumor because I had seen that word somewhere. And I started Googling it, and I saw that there was a neurosurgeon in Los Angeles, and that was his specialty. And so I got a hold of him and I said, I have this MRI. I've been told it's inoperable. Could you look at it? And he did, and called me and said, I can help you. I can do that surgery. So this whole thing for me was wrapped up in my faith in God, not letting something like this happen to me. I mean, after all, I went to my 4-year program thinking I was doing God's will and fulfilling a calling on my life. So obviously, I'm not going to die now. So
It makes sense to you.
it made sense to me. So I flew to Los Angeles. I had the brain surgery and it was an 8-hour surgery. And halfway through, the neurosurgeon stopped the surgery, went out and got my husband and my daughter, who at this point was an adult, and said, I need to know if you want me to continue this surgery because I could get this tumor out, but she could be blind, not be able to eat, not walk or anything. And they just decided, because they had the same belief system, she would not want to come. He said I would have to come back in about 5 years and have the surgery again if he just left part of that tumor there. And they decided to tell him to go ahead and finish the surgery. And when I woke up, I could I could swallow, I couldn't walk. My eyeball was over to here, like this eyeball was over to here, like the pupil, and everything was double and about 4 feet apart. I was deaf in my left ear. Tinnitus was roaring all the time in my head. Um, it was just, I can't even describe like what it was like. And here's another weird part. They put me on steroids, high dose steroids to keep my brain from swelling. And a high dose steroid causes you to just have these flights of fancy thoughts. And my flights of fancy thoughts were all about what a miracle it was that I was still alive and how God was going to use my story to bring people to Christ.
Hmm.
It's weird. And for days, every time I woke up, that's what I was thinking about. And I even was like seeing things, like seeing myself on a stage in front of thousands of women telling about this miracle, and they all like got saved. Like that's kind of Christian lingo.
Mhm.
And so I got out, I flew home. I had all this faith that I would recover, but it was horrible. And I was in bed and I started reading a lot of books because I had nothing else to do. But all I could think of was the shock that I was laying in bed recovering from a brain tumor. I mean, that's not something that would happen to me. Like already went through too much in life. How could this be happening to me? And I realized, you know what? In order to quit thinking about this all the time, you need something that will take so much of your brain power that you're not going to be able to think about it. What if you were to continue your master's degree and see if there's an online program where you could read your textbooks and do your work while you're laying in bed? And I found Capella University, which was fully accredited and had a program for counseling for becoming a psychotherapist, and applied. I don't remember if I told them that I was going to be lying in bed doing it. I don't remember. But I applied and they admitted me, and I started getting these textbooks, and I literally couldn't see except for through this one eye. And so I would hold the textbook up like this, laying in bed, scanning like all these words. And I ended up, so that program included you had to go to 2 residencies out of state. And then you had to do internships and practicums in jobs. And I didn't know how I was going to do any of that because I couldn't walk. And by the time I got to the first internship, it was in Minneapolis. That was about a year in, and they had to rent me a power chair, a motorized wheelchair, to get around that hotel for a week. And that's how I did that one. And then another year went by, and there was the second residency in Phoenix, and they rented me a power chair. But by that time, I could walk, but I looked like somebody who was very disabled. Like I couldn't walk straight. And I still did it. I did that one. Don't ask me where this gumption came from. And then I had to do an internship for 10 hours a week. And by that time, I had barely enough energy to do that. Then I had to do internship. That was a practicum. Then I had to do an internship for 30 hours a week. And I got a job in the counseling office of the college that I had graduated from. And it was just kind of this small bubble of you go in and sit down in your office and counsel people. And I had the physical energy to do that, but little else. And then I graduated and then I had to get a job because you have to do 3,000 hours of doing therapy with clients in order to get licensed.
So this
And
is at what age now that you have to get?
let's see, I graduated in 2010, so I would have turned 60
Okay.
the next year. So I was 59.
Okay.
So I had gone full time to school by this time for 7 years because the master's program at Capella was a 3-year program. So I was determined that I wasn't going to waste this. So I worked for a child and adolescent mental health agency and pushed myself to be able to work an 8-hour day and gather those hours. And then once I did that and I was licensed, I jumped right into private practice and continued to work with it.
How long does it take a person to get those 3,000 hours?
I did it in 2 years. And if you work full time for an agency where uh, you get clients because you're at an agency and they're supervising your work, 2 hours is, I think, average.
Okay.
It would take a lot longer if you tried to do it in private practice or part-time or anything.
Okay. Okay. So that was you were sort of set up for success because of where you were.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so then I went into private practice and I worked. Uh, well, I actually started it while I was working for the agency just so that I could do it, I guess. And just took a few clients that helped me pay the rent on the office. And then once I was licensed, I jumped in with both feet and I ended up with I only worked 3 days a week because that was all my energy level could take. And I ended up with almost 30 clients within a 3-day period for a while. And I realized that is not sustainable. And so I started uh, knocking, like when people would be done, I wouldn't add back in. I just kept myself at a level to where around 18 felt okay. And I ended up getting certifications in certain types of therapy and leading groups and taking kids from the children's hospital and working with foster kids and their families and all kinds of stuff like that in that period. And then suddenly I started having these symptoms. And every year I was going to get an MRI of my brain because that was part of it. And every year I was told it's stable, nothing's happening. But I started getting these symptoms and on the left side of my face. And this is, well, at the time, I just felt this tingling and my eye kind of twitched. And I remembered the neurosurgeon in Los Angeles saying to me, "Do you have any tingling or anything on that side of your face?" And I said, "No." And him saying, "That's astounding to me." And that's the only thing I ever remember him saying to me out of the whole time that he was my doctor for some weird reason. And I started getting this tingling on the side of my face, and I remembered that. I went back to my doctor and said, "I think we need to do an MRI early because I'm having this thing happen." And I got that done, and it turned out that that tumor had been growing back for 3 years,
Mm.
and every year they were telling me, "It's stable." And, like, to this day, I have not gotten answers about how that could have happened. So I don't know.
Mm.
But I had to give up the private practice, go back to that doctor in Los Angeles and have the surgery all over again. This time He really does feel like it will not grow back, although it could. And I still have MRIs on it, but I couldn't go back into private practice after that. The disabilities that the second surgery left me with made something like that impossible. But I still see clients by working online with a couple of different companies and in my own private practice of taking insurance. And it's part-time. And then I also do artwork and stuff like that.
So, oh my God, this live. Oh, I'm so glad that people listening can hear that you just keep going, Linda. You don't stop. You just keep going. No matter what life serves you, you find a way. And let's switch over to the art now. So I hope you'll all go to her Substack. Another thing coming, but within those pieces, you will see some of Linda's artwork because in her spare time, apparently she's an artist too, a watercolor artist. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Beautiful,
I do
beautiful.
different types, but that's my main one I love.
Did you go to school for that or did you learn that on your own?
Well, it's funny. When I was a kid, I have a picture of 2-year-old Linda at Christmas excitedly holding up a paint set. And a little bit later, my parents got me a oil painting set as a kid. I wasn't good at all. Um, when I in during the 1980s, I took some classes in toll painting. I don't know if you know what that is. It's decorative painting like on wooden things.
Mhm.
Like Scandinavian art is kind of like that. And I loved it. And I recognized that I was better than the other women in the class, but I never thought about painting paintings at that point. That was when I was with the abusive like husband you know. And so then in college, I took art classes as my um
Electives.
yeah, electives.
Mhm.
And I also recognized in that class that not only was I better than the other students, but that I was impressive to the professor. And I thought, oh, but then all my energy went into brain surgery, becoming a therapist, having a private practice. And for quite a few years, I didn't paint again. After the second brain surgery, it just gave me something to do to not think about things and feel good. And I started painting again. This was probably in um, 2016 or 17, something like that. And I realized, and I took some online classes, and I realized, oh my God, seriously, this is what I thought about it. I knew my paintings were good, but what I thought was, but anybody could do this if they just knew the steps. I really, really believed that.
Mhm.
And I still kind of do. But I didn't think a lot about, it was kind of imposter syndrome. I knew my paintings were good, but anybody could do it. Like, really, that's kind of what I thought. And, but I just kept going because I loved it. And then I discovered the world online. I think I was on a rabbit trail sometime of what surface pattern design was. And basically, what surface pattern design is any surface that has a design, someone designed it. Like, for instance, I always hold up this example, a Kleenex box.
So that's surface pattern design.
Yeah,
Okay.
anything like my phone case, anything that's got a pattern, fabric. And I thought, oh my gosh, I would love to do something like that. So I started a major course online in learning Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop and learning how to do stuff like that using my own artwork as the designs. And that I'm still doing that. It's just fun for me. So
So you
that's
now
art.
you're 73 years old, correct?
Yeah. I'll
Okay,
be 73 in July.
in July. And you're just continuing to branch out and have so much curiosity about things and learning. Let me ask you, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's in their third chapter, you know, just an empty nester, don't have to work anymore, have time? What would you say to them about how to create their lives going forward?
You know, I think about this a lot because I do have thoughts about, are you going to make it to a point in your life where you're going to be able to use all this stuff you're learning? Like, or are you going to pass away? Like, who knows? And I finally came to the conclusion, this is fun and exciting for me, and it's keeping me feeling young, and I'm not going to care if I never succeed at it after I pass away. I'm not going to care. So, I had this, there was a quote I read when I was in college as a 50 something year old that was written by a woman writer in the 1800s who went by the name George Eliot as a, um, her
Pseudonym, yeah.
yeah, pseudonym, because back then it was very hard to be published as a woman. So she called herself George Eliot, and she wrote, "It's never too late to become what you might have been." And
Oh, is that her? I have that framed. Oh,
yes, that's
let's
her.
get that out. That is word. Look at this.
Yes, and I took that quote and framed it and put it above my desk. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. I love that. And that actually I got like 10 years ago. And I went through a transformation, myself. So for me, that's like an inspirational quote. So great that you brought that up. So
Yeah.
so your advice is
To
what?
keep like, you have two choices. You can, well, there's more than two choices. I don't want to say it like that, but you can either sit in a rocking chair and knit, or a recliner and with the remote, or you can continue to work out your brain and be interesting and interested and become more than you maybe ever thought you would. Live some of those dreams that you gave up. Like, it's never too late. I really believe that with all my heart. And I think this keeps us young. This attracts interesting people into our life because they find us interesting, and it makes life exciting and fun. And I I think everybody should do that,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, I agree with you. And it's almost as if like you've had all these experiences, good and bad, and you've been through so many different hurdles. And now you have all this wisdom, so much life experience, and then you're going to sit in your recliner. Like it doesn't make sense to me. Like this is where your art or whatever you want to call it. This is where your opus, this thing that you've been working on, not knowing where this will all add up to be, but I just feel like this is such a beautiful time of life, and you are such a great example of someone who got lemons and made lemonade extraordinaire. So, what is coming up for you? And this is my last question. What can we see for you in 2024 and beyond?
So I have goals and dreams, and I'm hoping 2024 sees some of these come to fruition. But if they don't, I won't give up, because I was hoping these goals and dreams for last year, and it just took me longer uh, to manifest them. And so it won't stop me. But what I'm hoping happens is that I continue to work with clients, which there's no reason why I won't be able to do that. I hope to develop a website for my art practice, and I hope that some of my work is bought and ends up in other people's houses, and that my designs are licensed for products and fabric and all those things. And that's what I work towards every single day. I have in between my clients, I'm working on those goals.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm hoping for.
That's exciting. That's exciting. So if you want to know more about Linda, they should go to your Substack, correct?
Yes, my Substack is called Another Think Coming. And so you can search for it with that or by my name, Linda Hoenigsberg. And I have an Instagram where I have my artwork. It's my first initial, my middle name, and my last name. So I'm probably going to change that eventually, but it's spelled L Lockridge Hoenigsberg, Lochridge Hoenigsberg,
I'll
Hoenigsberg.
put it in the notes so people can.
Okay, good. Because I know that's not
That's a
a
mouthful
good
for sure.
handle.
That's a
And
mouthful.
yeah, that's a mouthful.
That
And
is. Oh my gosh, it's been so wonderful to hear about your life and how you just transformed yourself into this beautiful butterfly. And I wish you all the best going forward.
yeah,
Thank you so
thank you,
much for being
Lauren.
here. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.